about marriage, or I asked y'all about jobs, or I asked y'all about school, these kinds of things. And the idea is some people are going to value their individual freedom more than anything else. I also gave the example that if there's too much freedom, it's like everybody just walking around and swinging their fist. Do you remember this? And I almost hit several people in the face because they wouldn't answer. And the idea was if there's too much freedom and no order, then nobody really has freedom at all. Some people, it's not about being free, but it's about being safe, and it's about being protected. So that's the difference between freedom and order. And honestly, when you look at some of these articles, when we talked about the web cameras, some people said my property, my privacy, I don't want these damn cameras. Others said if the roads are really safer, then I would be willing to give up some freedom. That's the difference between freedom and order. Okay? What else have you got? Anything from chapter 1? Go ahead.
Well, how about social well, no.
Yeah, we've already dealt with that one.
Yes, I was going to say political science.
Don't worry about political science. Anything from chapter 2? Let's get into chapter 2.
The full faith and credit clause?
Yeah, okay, this Article 4 and full faith and credit clause, I think this is the third time this has come up now. We are not going to have that on the exam. Okay, so we're going to pull that one down. We will deal with that in chapter 3 for sure.
Then the pursuit of happiness then.
What was the pursuit of happiness? Property. Yeah, if you remember, I gave you a lot of examples of property from the Declaration. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And pursuit of happiness meant property. This is where the articles fall in. So think about the web cameras. Think about the eminent domain. Think about the revenge porn. Think about the song lyrics. There were a lot of them that were in there, and you could probably go further with that if you wanted. Other terms. Go ahead.
How about general fractions?
We've talked about a lot of fractions, and this is something that I started to mention to make sure that y'all were comfortable with. Can you give me any examples of fractions that we've talked about in class? What's 2/3? 2/3 is votes by the Senate and the House to do something. Okay, that's the beginning. What's the something? Anybody? What's the 2/3?
Override a president's veto.
2/3 vote by the House and Senate will override a presidential veto, and it's kind of hard to get that. 2/3 also dealt with something else that the House and Senate could vote for that we just talked about on Wednesday. Proposing a constitutional amendment. 2/3 vote proposes a constitutional amendment. So keep that in mind. What other fractions? Dylan, you started to list some off. 2/3? 3/4. What's 3/4?
To ratify an amendment, you need 3/4 of the state.
That's right. 3/4 of the states. And that's the most common way. But you need 3/4 of the states, or that's 38 out of 50, to ratify a constitutional amendment. Anything else? Go ahead.
It's also a 2/3 vote for the House and the Senate to propose an amendment.
Yeah, we're repeating a lot of stuff today. You're right. And you'll see it on the table when we go back through. What other fractions besides 2/3 and 3/4?
3/5.
What's 3/5?
The slaves.
What about the slaves? What about the slaves?
3/5 of
5 slaves equals 3/5 of a person. Well, 5 slaves equals 3 people, or 1 slave equals 3/5 of a person. And that was significant because that means that a slave is less than human. But what did the 3/5 use to calculate? Go ahead.
It was for votes.
For votes. For votes for what? You're right, but for what exactly?
I mean, it was to make sure that the people who voted were the people that they wanted to
You're going more off the track now. Well, go ahead. Taxation. The South would have to pay taxes on 3/5 of all of the slaves that they held because taxation was based on population, and 3/5 of what else? Representation. So 3/5 of the slaves would count for representation purposes in the House of Representatives. Yes. Anything else? Go ahead.
I'm just going to ask, can you repeat when you said 5 slaves?
Oh, it's all on the tape. Yeah, so I just want to keep getting as much new stuff in as we can because I did tell you it was only going to be about an hour. Go ahead, Dan.
Dual federalism.
Don't worry about dual federalism. Yeah, I'll take that one off.
About what?
Dual federalism. Other questions? It really looks like, in terms of terms, the only term from chapter 3 is in the beginning, and that was answered at the beginning.
Which one was it?
In the beginning, yes.
Was Schoolhouse Rock, was there anything else about that besides the pursuit of happiness?
Schoolhouse Rock was the Declaration of Independence, yeah. So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'm not going to ask you questions about any of the scenes or anything like that. What else have you got?
New Jersey plan and Virginia plan.
What was the difference between the New Jersey and the Virginia plan? Anybody? A little bit louder?
The Virginia plan was representation based on population. I think the New Jersey plan was representation based on the state.
Based on the state.
Or it was based on equal representation.
Equal representation. The big states, and we talked about this, the big states basically said that they wanted representation based on population. And the sense was that the more population they had, the more representation they should have in the new government.
That was the Virginia plan, right?
Yeah, we're repeating good today. I hope we can repeat these things good on Friday. The New Jersey plan, to your point, was based on equality. So all states, regardless of their size, every state should have the exact same representation. And if you remember, it was the Connecticut Compromise, or the Connecticut Plan, that ultimately put the two together, and the House of Representatives became the Virginia Plan, and the New Jersey Plan became the United States Senate. And I had shown y'all how California has like 55 House members and 2 senators. Wyoming has 1 House member and 2 senators. So California, a big state, has its advantage in the House. Even though they're tied, Wyoming kind of has an advantage in the Senate because they have so many fewer people. So that's really what that was. What else have you got from chapter 2? Anything? Go ahead.
How about criminal searches?
Don't worry about criminal searches.
About preamble.
You know what? Don't worry about the preamble. Let's go into articles, because the articles are going to be kind of important on this, it looks like, doesn't it? Articles. Any questions about the articles?
Do we have to know anything besides like 1, 2, and 7?
1, 2, 3, and 7.
Yeah.
What's that?
The articles.
Oh, no, I mean the actual articles that we talked about in class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll come back to that, I promise. Go ahead.
Didn't we not, I don't think we did the gun drawing one, did we?
That's the first
one.
one.
That was the
You
first
did.
one.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, that was the first one, yeah. So what questions have y'all got about articles?
Oh.
Because there's the ability to really get some bonus points on the exam by explaining these articles well.
Not all of those are posted.
Not all of them are posted?
At least when I looked earlier. All
Okay,
of them.
yes, Cattell.
The Starbucks one.
What was the Starbucks article? Go ahead.
So the Starbucks article was when 2 dudes came into a Starbucks. They didn't order anything. They were just kind of sitting around waiting for someone to come. So a manager popped in asking them, are you buying anything? They said no, so she wanted to kick them out. They refused to leave, so she called the cops.
And?
And they were taken out of said respective Starbucks and kept in prison for over 24 hours.
Well, prison might not quite
Well,
be.
not prison, jail.
They
Because
were detained,
there
and
was this-
I don't think it was quite 24 hours on this. I don't think it was quite that much, but you get the gist on this. And this was actually something that just, in fact, happened. This is only, golly, not even 2 years ago now. And we were talking about implicit bias. And if you remember with implicit bias, the argument that we had talked about was, okay, these were 2 black gentlemen, I mean, relatively young black gentlemen, in fact, and they didn't buy anything. And we had asked the question, well, okay, if it would have been 2 white guys, for example, or if it would have been me, would they have been treated this way by the manager and the police? Well, the argument is because of the way that they look, there's an implicit bias there that, in fact, it's very likely that other groups wouldn't have been treated that way. Now, we also discussed the idea, if I have a business and I'm in business to make money and it's busy, is it really discrimination for me to ask somebody to leave? Or, in fact, is this good business because we need to maximize the amounts of tables and things? And if you remember when we talked about this, I asked y'all, do y'all routinely go into places and not buy things? And it's kind of funny, but it sure seems like a lot of folks actually do suggest that they will go into places and they don't they don't actually buy anything at all, and they're not actually arrested or told to leave or anything along these lines. They were detained for about 8 hours. Were they ultimately charged? No. And in fact, they were given what from Starbucks?
Free Starbucks?
They were given grants for business startups. No, not free Starbucks. I'm not sure who yelled that out. But they were given business grants. They were also given a formal apology. And Starbucks closed down their stores, just about all of them, for kind of a diversity or an implicit bias training. So kind of keep that thought in mind as you look at this. Other articles on here that maybe you have questions about. Remember, make sure that you tell me the facts. Make sure you tell me a little bit of both arguments, and make sure you tell me the outcome, usually who won. Go ahead.
What do you want us to know from the Harriet Tubman article?
What was the Harriet Tubman article?
They want to put her face on a coin. I don't remember, or what was it a coin? It was a dollar bill.
They want to replace George.
Yeah, they wanted to replace him.
Who did they want to replace?
Andrew Jackson.
Guy on the $20 bill.
They wanted to put her on the $20 bill, yeah. They wanted to put her on the $20 bill on the front and have a smaller image of Andrew Jackson on the back. And if you remember when we were talking about this, the terms pale, male, and stale came up an awful lot because I asked you who was on your money. And one of the arguments is that if you put people on our money that look like people in the country, then all of a sudden maybe there will be some socialization, maybe it just won't be the old wealthy white guys. If you recall, when we talked about this, many of y'all primarily used your debit cards for purchases, which means that you didn't really use that much cash at all. So some of you really liked the idea of having different people on the money, but in fact, you weren't going to be using the money anyway, so maybe this would be of limited effect. Do y'all remember why they picked her?
Because she has a long list of things she's done for the country. She's freed slaves, she's served in the Civil War. Yeah.
The big thing was the Underground Railroad, and I mentioned to y'all, I was not aware of this being a North Carolinian mostly, but Harriet Tubman was a Marylander, and in fact she led a lot of folks, about I think it was 90 in the article, to freedom through the Underground Railroad, and freed herself and others, and I mean there were a lot of good reasons to put her on the bill versus Andrew Jackson, who was over the Trail of Tears, and you could argue problems, awful situations with Native Americans. Do you remember what bill Trump wanted to put Harriet Tubman on?
On a $2 bill.
Wanted to put Harriet Tubman on the $2 bill. And do you remember what we talked about when we talked about the $2 bill? What's that? No one uses it, so if you put her on the $2 bill, you're kind of relegating her to second-class status. Do you remember what was on the $2 bill now? Not Sacagawea. Oh, shame on y'all. What was on the back of the $2 bill?
Oh, on the back of it?
Yeah.
It was the signing.
The signing of the Declaration of Independence, and that's one of the pictures, of course, that's in the Capitol, under the Capitol dome, that we'll look at a little bit later. What else have y'all got for questions? We've covered Harriet Tubman, we've covered buffer zone, we've covered Starbucks. The gun drawing one, and let me go back to this really quick. 2 of the 3 classes dealt with this. The 9 o'clock didn't, so I'm going to try and sneak this in. We talked about Ladies' Night in one of the classes today and one of the classes previously. Ladies' Night is where women go to the bars and they can get free or reduced price drinks, and it's considered perfectly legal. And you notice up here in New York, they actually had a case that compared this to gender discrimination, and they suggested that Ladies' Night should be relegated with segregation and slavery to the dustbin of civil rights history. Okay, let me mention this. Okay, in the lawsuit when they did this, the state gives liquor licenses, right? And if the state gives liquor licenses and then you're going to give Chantal preferential treatment with liquor but make Tristan pay full price, this is like the state sanctioning discrimination. And the courts, actually, the guy that's making this argument, I mean, it's really a fair argument. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I understand where it's coming from. New York threw it out, and ultimately they said, if you want man's night, which is kind of what he's arguing, there are clubs that will give you man's night, but maybe they weren't clubs that he wanted to go to. Now, with that in mind, and I bring this up under federalism, the Minnesota Human Rights Department, a couple of years later, actually ruled Ladies' Night outlawed, ruling that offering women discounted drinks is a form of gender discrimination. So understand, and we talked about this in the 10 o'clock today, but in the 11 o'clock previously, ladies' night is unconstitutional. Happy hour is legal because everybody gets treated the same, but ladies' night is giving preferential treatment by gender, and the state is endorsing it by giving the liquor license. That's going to be struck down increasingly going forward. So keep that in mind. The gun drawing, if you remember, the stick figures, make sure that you can tell me the story on that. What did the kid draw?
A gun,
What kind of gun?
It was
Drew a water gun. How was he punished? Do you remember?
he was suspended.
Suspended, and then I believe there was also counseling that needed to be done as well. And he said he drew a water gun. And y'all remember the story of how the gun got to the friend?
He gave it to her, and then the girl who had the picture gave it to the mom, who expressed worry to the school.
Yeah.
And the school ultimately